Did you notice that this show doesn't have any commercials? I'm not selling you diapers or vitamins or smoothies or gasoline. That's because I don't want corporate sponsors telling us what to investigate and what to say. Instead, you're our sponsors. This is a production by our nonprofit, the Informed Consent Action Network. If you want more investigations, more hard-hitting news, if you want the truth, go to ICanDecide.org and donate now. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are out there in the world. It's time to step out onto the high wire. Welcome, everybody. You know, as I've been traveling all around the country, many of the parents out there here in America keep saying to me, now that we're homeschooling, since we're social distancing, isolating, you know, whether it's computer learning or we've just dropped out of the school altogether, you keep telling me that you're using the high wire as one of your classes for your children to discuss medicine and the issues of our time when it comes to the pandemic and vaccinations. So I want to have a little caveat at the top of the show here. If I am speaking to a homeschool right now, why don't you kids just leave the room for about 2 minutes, because there's an image that may or may not be appropriate in my opening here that I would like to present. While those kids are moving out of the room, I want to tell you all, we have a gigantic show today. We have a former White House official, Darren Beattie, is joining us in just a little bit to talk about the lockdowns and the potential dangers no one wants to talk about of those lockdowns. Also, you know, you haven't missed it, the discussion about the new Pfizer vaccine, the trials showing that it's 90% effective. Today, here and only here on no other news network, we are going to actually discuss the science behind this supposed 90% effective vaccine. So if you have friends that have been screaming in your face and telling you, you better get ready to line up, why don't you get them to tune into the high wire right now, because we're going to get deep into that conversation. But first, I saw this tweet go out that, you know, every once in a while it makes me giggle, and I want to share it with you. I literally wrote a book to warn you guys about this. George Orwell, author of 1984. Of course, we keep talking about how this seems like some sort of dystopian novel, but in all those novels, I don't ever remember seeing this scene.
Oh my God, I forgot how much it sucks to be around everybody. I think I'm gonna be sick all over cow.
That's enough! Got him!
We all have to quarantine together for 2 weeks. You don't want to infect your families, do you? You were all exposed to a student here who was taken to the hospital due to COVID. Yes.
We were there, and Token was actually taken to the hospital because you guys shot him.
Yes, due to COVID. If it weren't for COVID, all the previous teachers would have still been here, we wouldn't have been in the class, and nobody would have gotten shot.
It was COVID related.
That doesn't make any sense.
Obviously, a disturbing rendition of the world we live in, but it is not any stranger than what we're seeing in the news every day that we turn it on now. But to get into the news and what's happening in our country and around the world, it's time for our favorite part of the show, the Jackson Report. Oh, Jeffrey, if only this were only a South Park episode we were all laughing at. Unfortunately, it happens to be our reality. So in the real world of what's going on, what happened in the news this week?
Yeah, well, let's take a look at some of what the potential real world may look like under a Biden presidency. I've talked to a lot of people, and they said, I wasn't aware that Biden was for vaccines and lockdowns and masks, and there's a lot of information going around out there. So let's just take a look at the headlines and look at his plan overview. Okay. So this was from CNBC, just talking about the basic overview. And it says, this was 4 days ago, here's how President-elect Joe Biden plans to fight the coronavirus pandemic. And it says right in the first sentence there, The U.S. can expect increased COVID-19 testing, a national mask policy, and the possibility of nationwide lockdowns once President-elect Joe Biden takes office January 20th. Now, let's go through each one of these things. So let's take a look here at Biden on lockdowns. Now, this is probably one of the most contentious issues with Biden and the media going back and forth. So there's an article here. It talks about what he's discussed on lockdown. So it says what Joe Biden has said about the nationwide lockdown if U.S. COVID cases continue to spiral. So he said he'll do whatever it takes. He said he'll follow science. And he also said this, as told by a Twitter message, a Twitter video. This was Molly Nagel. She's a campaign reporter for ABC News. And she said, this is Biden, quote, "I would shut it down. I would listen to the scientists," Joe Biden told David Muir Friday of the country to stop the spread of COVID-19 in his first joint interview alongside his running mate, Kamala Harris. Now, he has since backtracked that and said he wouldn't do a hard lockdown. He wouldn't shut it down. He would keep businesses open as much as possible and work with businesses to not have such an impact to try to get our economy back online. But one of the problems with that is just yesterday, we had one of his COVID-19 task force advisors, his Scott Atlas, if you will, come out. This is Michael Osterholm. He came out and said, COVID advisor says U.S. lockdown of 4 to 6 weeks could control the pandemic and revive the economy.
I'd love to know how you revive an economy by locking it down, letting, offices and buildings and businesses be destroyed. And, as I sit here, all I want to say is, Joe, go back and watch last week's show. If you want to know what you need to do, you need to stop using these PCR tests so that you don't see a spiral in infections. We don't have a spiral in this disease. We have a fake case-demic going on that doesn't exist. Stop testing asymptomatic, people that don't really have it. We went through all the PCR testing. If you missed that episode last week, please go back and watch it. Anyone, huge breaking story last week, almost as big as the story we're going to be breaking today. But that's what I got to say. You'll do anything. You'll do anything, Joe. How about we stop PCR testing everybody that has no symptoms, and let's really look at the cycles we're using. That would be a great start. But go ahead. Didn't mean to interrupt you. I just had to blurt that out.
That's okay. In fact, we'll get into that a little further into the show here. I have some headlines on that. But back to Joe Biden. So he claims this is the first kind of window we peel back and get a look at the scientists he's claiming to follow, what they're actually saying and how they're going to guide the policy. So back to that article, there's a couple of quotes in there that are really important. Now, this is Michael Osterholm again. He says, the problem with the March to May lockdown was that it was not uniformly stringent across the country. For example, Minnesota deemed 78% of its workers essential. They wrote in the New York Times, to be effective, the lockdown has to be as comprehensive and strict as possible.
Wow.
And that goes on to say, shutting down businesses and paying people for lost wages for 4 to 6 weeks could help the coronavirus pandemic in check, get the coronavirus pandemic in check, get the economy on track until a vaccine is approved and distributed, he says. So this is what we're looking at. In my opinion, a lot of issues with just those quotes, putting a countrywide lockdown that almost goes against what we've been told to just shield the vulnerable, focus protection. I thought we were supposed to not do the whole countrywide thing because of the economy. But anyway,
let me jump in here, Jeffrey, because I'm sensing from our audience right now. Many of our audience are saying, why are you even speaking about Joe Biden as though he's president? There is a count going down. There are lawsuits going down. So let me be perfectly clear. I think what we're showing is what potentially could be the future president of the United States of America. I personally do not believe that is decided until it's, ratified and put into stone in mid-December when we actually make that happen. I believe we should make sure that this vote was true, that all the real votes get counted. I don't want to see any side cheat in any election, and there are a lot of very, very questionable Shocking discoveries taking place in this vote count that is taking place around this nation. So for all of you out there, I just want to say that I don't believe that Joe Biden has been elected president yet. That is not something that CNN does, Fox News, news agencies don't do that. These have to be certified. Many of these states are already saying they're going to have recounts. There's lawsuits about having recounts. So let me be clear, I don't want to be speaking about Joe Biden as though he's president, but at the High Wire, no matter who's president, we're always going to stick to the truth and what we know about the science. I had a sense out there because it's a very sensitive time. So just know that's where we stand, and we should be aware. There are two candidates that are, hanging in the balance right now, and when the true vote comes through, that's when we will know which one of these candidates is president of the United States of America. But it's interesting, I think, and what's fascinating is we were asking, right? Everyone was asking Joe Biden why don't you announce your COVID task force? Why don't you announce your plan? Why don't we know where we're going so we know what we're voting for? And now, after the vote is as close as it is, you got to ask yourself, would the vote have been this close had Joe Biden said to everybody, hey, this is my lead guy, and he doesn't even believe in soft lockdowns. He believes in hard lockdowns. We haven't locked down this country enough. That's what we plan on doing. And by the way, when we look at all those hard lockdowns all around the world, they didn't work, and we don't care. So I think that's the point. So just wanted to put that in there. Okay, moving on.
Yeah, that's very important. Some of the articles I am quoting from are saying, quote, President-elect, and as you said, the media does not crown the king or give the president the presidency. Right. So there are a lot of issues still with the voting in several states. So
right.
Now let's look at Biden on masks and Biden on vaccines, and we'll finish up this point. So Biden on masks, every American to wear a mask when they are around people outside. So this is right from joebiden.com. So let me take a look at that. This is directly from his website on how to deal with COVID-19 as far as the masking. He's been very clear on. There's no doublespeak on this one. So he says, all the Americans must wear a mask when they're around people outside of their household. Every governor to make it mandatory in their state, and the local authorities will also do the mandatory in their state orders. So this is something that he has been clear on, is literally written in stone on his website. So perhaps if he does take the presidency, this is something that will not even be an issue with anybody, or should be surprised to see this coming out of the blue, Now let's look at the vaccine
Well, hold on a
topic.
second. Let me just stay right there, because this reminds me of another issue I've been having all along. I remember when candidate Joe Biden, said to the television in the middle of the debate, for all of you that have empty seats at your dinner table now, that have suffered this great loss, and I thought, I don't know anyone that has an empty seat at their dinner table. This death rate at just over 200,000 may sound like a lot, but 650,000 people die every year of heart disease. We've had empty chairs at empty tables, at our tables from heart disease and cancer and smoking and COPD every single year of our lives. But the smallest number we've ever seen is the missing chairs from COVID-19. So when he talks about the mask, I'm going to go governor to governor. Honestly, people, can we be honest here? Can we be honest? I am flying all over the country, okay? I'm the only person I know walking through an airport. I'm the only one I see not wearing a mask. And I've told you, I'm not going to wear a mask till someone forces me. So once I get on a plane, someone says, wear the mask, fine. So, and by the way, I haven't tested positive for COVID-19. I keep checking. So if you want to blame the spread on the one guy not wearing a mask in an airport, good luck with that. So this whole idea that we're going to go and mask everybody is masked, Joe. We are masked, and we're still seeing this, rise, as you call it, the spiraling of COVID-19. This is nothing new. When do we get the masks off? That's what I would like to know. I just don't get it. People talk about, it's those people not wearing masks. Where are they? Where are my brethren not wearing the masks? I would love to see you out there, but it's not happening. All right, just again. Right. This stuff drives me crazy, the reporting on this, as though it's something new. We're all masked, Joe. I'm even wearing my mask when someone walks up and tells me to. Even though we have scientific proof, it's a total waste of our time. All right, go ahead.
And to your point, his plan actually calls for beating COVID-19, how they're going to beat COVID-19,
Yeah.
but there's no
You
parameters on
beat
what
it.
that
We're gonna beat on it and
beating looks
beat on
like.
it and beat on it.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what that beating looks like, but anyway, so as Michael Osterholm mentioned, we're going to do all this, the lockdown perhaps for 4 to 6 weeks until a vaccine's ready. So
Right.
Biden on vaccines, he's spoken on it a little bit, and what he's basically said as far as the vaccines is he's maybe looking for a mandate. So this is a direct headline: Joe Biden on COVID-19 vaccine. We should be thinking about making it mandatory. And he says you can't enforce it, but you can tell people you can't come to school without it. So again, we're going to start doing the squeeze. Anybody with the measles outbreak last year probably knows what that looks
Yeah.
like. They take away their exemptions, religious, philosophical, etc. So his plan does call for $25 billion to be invested in distribution. So giving more money there to the big pharma manufacturing and distribution of this.
How many
so
billion?
that
20? Did you say 25 billion?
correct, 25
Wow.
billion. That's what his plan calls for.
All right.
So
Well, I
what
mean,
we're looking at there is kind of in a nutshell for people that may not understand what it looks like if he gets in as president, and that's a big if. With what's going on right now. But
yeah.
you mentioned testing, and let's go over to the UK, specifically Liverpool.
Okay.
The world's eyes are on Liverpool right now. They announced that they're going to do citywide mandatory testing of every resident in their city. So this is out of The Guardian. Liverpool to pioneer UK's first attempt at mass COVID testing. So they say in here, logistical help of the army will be deployed in a pilot to see whether mass population screening is feasible across other regions of England. To be successful, it says, it will need not only to find those who are infected regardless of symptoms, but convince them to isolate. Now, Del, I know what you're thinking when you read that. So it took only 8 days for Liverpool, the test city, to spread through other regions, almost 70 of them. So we have the UK Health Secretary, Matt Hancock. He says mass COVID testing scheme adopted in Liverpool would be rolled out across 67 authorities. Now, he claims he wrote to the directors of all the authorities in England. So far, 67 have said they would do it, and he expects a lot more to start doing it. So this is something that it moved very quickly. It started out in Liverpool and then rolls right out. And it also moved quickly in the scope of it and the restrictions put on it. So we have in Liverpool now, just days later, no test, no entry was the headline. How Liverpool's mass testing pilot may offer a glimpse of a future living with coronavirus. And now we get into the big problem is, like you said earlier, the testing accuracy. The first problem is that no one knows just how accurate the new rapid lateral flow tests actually are. So untried are they that they still come with a manufacturer's warning. Negative results do not preclude infection. While the government says it has run laboratory trials and is satisfied with accuracy rates, it has not published any data. So there's a big problem.
I
And
mean,
now we have
it's just like I think back to growing up with like Logan's Run and these movies where like these walled-in cities and they're testing. They were doing things like testing temperatures or checking a bracelet on your hand. I mean, it's just it's really amazing. It's amazing. I know I don't have to say it. I know we're all thinking the same thing. But it's really happening, folks. It's really happening. And I love how they have a pilot program, and they don't even get through the pilot program before it just starts spreading around. Like let's not waste any time proving that this was a terrible idea in Liverpool. Let's make sure that we make sure it's a terrible idea across 67 different counties or cities or it's the whole way they do everything. And then we never get an end result, right? All we hear is arguments about whether or not we learned anything from that. All we see is some continued rise in cases. The deaths are going down no matter what these fools are arguing about. And of course, I mean, I know last week we were showing some of the protests in Liverpool are extreme. I mean, there are cops, there are, all over England. They've had it, right? They are really standing up against this. And as I've said before, I mean, these are shots from London, England right now. We're just seconds away from this. I mean, we have a presidential candidate that is essentially looks like promising to move in the same direction. I wonder if we're going to handle this much different. Are we all just going to lock down in our basements and say, okay, I guess,
That's a valid,
all right, test me.
Valid question.
We'll see.
Valid question. And in the UK, this is part of their what's called Operation Moonshot. So it's a 100 billion euro program to test everyone regularly in cities, towns, and then across all of England. So
amazing.
What's happening right now, though, is you have the science community standing up. Instead of on the back end here, they're right in the front end saying this is not right. This needs to really be looked at. This needs to be checked out. So there's a BMJ opinion piece. This was written by Angela Raffles. She's a University of Bristol public health consultant, and it's called "Screening the Healthy Population for COVID-19 is of Unknown Value, but is still being introduced nationwide." She calls it one of the most unethical proposals of public funds she's ever seen. And then she also says that there's really no information being given to the participants throughout these cities to explain the project, the actual project, what's happening. Is it research? How will this data be used? It's not thorough whatsoever. And another person that came out, this is one of the UK's public health leaders, Alison Pollock. She came out in a public letter, and she wrote it to all the MPs in Liverpool, and she said that basically, quote, "We understand that the Liverpool pilot is likely to use a direct lamp test and a lateral flow assay. Currently, there is little or no evidence of the accuracy of either of these tests for their use in pre-symptomatic and asymptomatic cases or in field settings." And then she goes on to write, this is absolutely bombshell. "The false positive rates of these tests have not been established in community use, and neither have the implications for contact tracing services. Evaluations of other similar tests by the WHO has suggested between 1% and 5% of people without infection may get false positive findings. This means that if 1 in 100 people tested in the pilot have asymptomatic infections, as few as 1 in 5 of those getting positive results will actually have COVID-19. And 4 out of 5 would be false positives, and they and their contacts would unnecessarily be told to isolate." Now, that's a big problem.
Wow.
And Alison Pollock, she recently spoke to the BBC, and take a look. This is what she had to say.
We can speak now to Alison Pollock, who's the Professor of Public Health at Newcastle University. Good afternoon to you. You've expressed scepticism about mass testing. Why?
Well, I think the first thing to say is the government has spent £12 billion on a centralised, privatised contact tracing system that doesn't work. These tests, the public have been given misinformation. It is not a test which tells you whether you have infection or whether you're infectious. It simply tells you whether you have bits of the RNA virus. Now, in a place like Liverpool, where the rates of infection are falling dramatically, it's very likely that quite a lot of the population will have evidence of old infection. And that, especially in children, could result in them being isolated unnecessarily and harmfully. The second thing about this test is not only is it not a test that tells you whether you have infection or infectiousness, these tests have not been properly evaluated in community settings. This is a real worry. We do not know whether they work and what they tell us in community settings. And the government's just spent £100 million for Liverpool buying something called Innova tests, which explicitly say they should not be used in community settings. As the WHO and SAGE have said, focus on identifying people with symptoms and isolating them. And they do not recommend mass asymptomatic testing. And we don't know how it's going to integrate into primary care or into public health, and how it's actually going to be effective.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off there. We're just slightly short on time. Thank you so much. That's Professor Alison Pollock.
Sorry to cut you off there, because we are mainstream news, and this is not information we ever planned on sharing. You went deeper than we want, and we know, though you are absolutely fascinated at how we have a world-renowned scientist saying that this test is total baloney, we need to move on and talk about other things that are going to scare you into compliance. I mean, it's getting so tiring to see this limited moment, what now appears to be the majority of scientists are getting in mainstream media, as this agenda is being pushed by government agents that don't know anything about what they're doing. I mean, I think what we're all staggered by is this accidental? I mean, are they really testing because they think they're going to stop this virus? Do they really think this virus is deadly, or is it about something else? Are they collecting DNA? What are they actually doing, I think, is what is on our minds. You know, what is happening here? But I mean, thank God these scientists, I think they're risking their lives, their careers to step it up. Let me take this opportunity to say that we will never cut off scientists like that. We don't. And I don't know if you saw that interview in America. BBC tends to go a little bit further, but that's what the High Wire does. We are bringing you the information from around the world that no one on your television set is giving you. You are paying for a cable company to deliver lying, I almost had an expletive come out of my mouth, what they call themselves journalists, lying to you, funded by pharma, funded by big tech, to tell you about a world they want you to believe you live in. The High Wire is the only place where you are getting the red pill. You are getting the truth as it exists with real peer-reviewed science in all of it. So for all of you watching on Facebook or watching everywhere else right now, just know not only are we going to tell you these things today, every single study, every single video, everything that we're presenting on this show, you will have access to. All you have to do is go to our website. If you're not on thehighwire.com right now, go to thehighwire.com and just sign up for our newsletter. And then so that we can involve you and send you every Monday, we are going to send you a newsletter that has a link to every peer-reviewed study, everything these scientists are referencing, so that you can read it for yourself and come to your conclusion, not my conclusion, not Jeffrey's conclusion. Sure, we are coming to our own conclusions in front of you, but that's why we give it to you. You can say, you can go ahead and write us at the High Wire or info@ICanDecide.org and say, you know what? I don't think you read that article the same way that I read it. Fine, I would love to hear your thoughts. But we're handing it and putting it into your hands so that you can have an honest and educated opinion and idea about what's happening. Who else is doing that for you? If you appreciate that level of transparency, then why don't you do us a favor and donate to us right now? Go to ICanDecide.org. That's the nonprofit that sponsors this. Donate. Become a recurring donor today. We're asking for $20 for 2020, but even if you only want to send us $1 a month, or how about 1 cup of coffee, $5 a month? Whatever you can do, know that you're making a difference. We have no sponsors. You are making it possible to get this truth that nobody, and by the way, now I'm going to officially say you've all watched Fox take you on an incredible road of deceit over the last week, not sharing information you want to see. We will never do that to you. So please, help make High Wire the most successful and powerful news agency in the world, because I come from CBS. So do my producers. We are doing this the way we always dreamed it should be done, the way we were taught in school to do it. We're the only ones doing it. Help us make that possible so that we can spread the word around the world. All right, Jeffrey, get back to the rest of what we got to say in the news.
Yeah, really, when the scientists and the doctors are allowed to speak, their message is often contrary to what we're seeing throughout the mainstream media and the official narratives that we're given. And so, as Scott Atlas once said, he said officials are claiming to be following the science, but acting to the contrary. And again, with Alison Pollock here, this is what we're seeing when she got shut out by the BBC.
Yeah.
So let's talk lockdowns. Let's go back to this and let's talk costs of lockdowns. Let's look at some of these statistics. And, you know, the lockdowns, it's important that we really make sure that these lockdowns don't do more damage. And I'm about to present some stuff that shows that that might be the case. But let's look way back to Trump during the debates with Biden. And this is what he had to say on the lockdowns.
Okay.
We have to open our country. We're not going to have a country. You can't do this. We can't keep this country closed. This is a massive country with a massive economy. People are losing their jobs. They're committing suicide. There's depression, alcohol, drugs at a level that nobody's ever seen before. There's abuse, tremendous abuse. We have to open our country. You know, I've said it often. The cure cannot be worse than the problem itself.
We keep hearing that, right? Are the lockdowns causing more damage than the disease itself? And remember, For those that haven't been watching the high wire through this pandemic, we know that the CDC numbers show us that the death rate of COVID-19 in America is about 0.26%, a quarter of 1%, nowhere near the 2 to 3% that was promised. The imperial model was wrong. You can go back. Here's the breakdown, really. Wrap your heads around this. If you're 0 to 19, you have a 99.997% success rate at overcoming COVID-19. That's essentially zero chance of death. 20 to 49, 99.98%. 50 to 69, moving towards what we know to be a more critical group. They're still at a 99.5% success rate. Their immune systems are going to beat COVID-19. And then 70 plus is where you really start seeing the numbers shift. And of course, 70 plus, it really has to do with whether you have other comorbidities, heart disease, COPD, diabetes, all of these things that are contributing to the issue. And they say that that very high risk group doesn't just have one comorbidity, they have on average 2.5 other life-threatening illnesses. All right.
Yes.
So tell us about lockdowns. Is there a way to determine whether they are actually doing more harm than the disease itself?
Yeah, there's a calculation. It's titled Life Years Lost. And some of the first times we've seen this was actually in the UK and then also in the US. But in the UK, we had an article that came out. This was last July. Now, remember, March were the lockdowns. Then in July, it says coronavirus lockdown could kill 200,000 Brits with 1 million life years lost. So there's that word. Now, this was an official study done by the government. And March was in their lockdown. So it's basically 1 month after the lockdown started in the UK. They already started tallying these and seeing how this would come out. So again, we have officials behind closed doors doing this. It would be really nice if we would have been brought into this as the public to have a public debate on whether or not we want to be locked down if we're looking at 1 million life years lost. So at the time, Boris Johnson said he does not want to do a second lockdown, calling that a nuclear option. So certainly doesn't want to reinstate a second lockdown, comparing it to a nuclear deterrent. So you can see how fast that one was swept aside with new lockdowns last week. Now, when we bring it over to the US, there was some red flashing warning lights in July from CDC Director Robert Redfield. So take a look at this. This was during a presentation he gave in July.
There has been another cost that we've seen, particularly in high schools. We're seeing, sadly, far greater suicides now than we are deaths from COVID. We're seeing far greater deaths from drug overdose that are above excess, that what we had as background, than we are seeing deaths from COVID.
I remember that. I mean, amazing to say higher rates of suicide and these deaths of, I guess, despair, you call them, higher than the rates of COVID. Really, really, that was shocking. So how does that play into this lives lost?
Yes. So the way that's calculated, really basically kind of like a napkin calculation, is you have perhaps an infant who is 1 year old. Their life expectancy is expected to be, say, 78 years. They die from COVID or they die from something from the lockdown. They've lost 77 years. So that's their 77 years life lost. So this is how this is being calculated. Now, the CDC came out with some numbers.
So obviously, if you die and you're older, if you're, let's say, 74, and you die of whatever, heart disease, COVID, whatever they decide to call it, then you only lost, what, 3 to 5, whatever, I forget your original number, but 3 live years lost versus the 77 of a child. So it sort of values a remainder in your life. Is that correct? The remaining time you have left in your life?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it gives kind of an average of that age, average length of life, and then it's the remainder of the life that you have to live, really, that you lost.
Okay.
So what I was doing is I looked through the headlines, I looked through some of this stuff just to see these flashing warning lights. Since we're not really given an open debate on this, it's not really being too much into the public. The health officials aren't really talking about it, minus Scott Atlas, and Trump mentioned it as well. So the CDC produced some numbers, and they were showing that 25 to 44-year-olds, there all of a sudden was an excess death amongst them. And these were the figures. The highest average percent increase in the number of fatalities relative to the previous years was among these 25 to 44-year-olds. So looking at the actual CDC report, this was a morbidity and mortality report from the end of October, it says, quote, I'm going to read directly from this. Overall, an estimated 299,028 excess deaths have occurred in the United States from late January through October 3rd, 2020, with 2/3 of those attributed to COVID-19. The largest percentage increase we're seeing among adults aged 25 to 44. Now, as you've shown earlier, we know that that is an age group that's not very susceptible to dying from COVID-19. So what the heck's going on?
Right.
Scott Gottlieb, a former FDA commissioner and now board of director member of Pfizer, was interviewed by Squawk Box on CNBC. And this is what he had to say about those exact numbers.
The CDC also coming out with a study saying that there were 299, about 300,000 excess deaths thus far in 2020. In particular, and this to me was the surprising part about it, it said that it struck 25 to 44-year-olds very hard. Their excess death rate was up 26.5%. So how do you square both of these numbers we're seeing?
Yeah, we have to break down those CDC numbers a little bit. So 2/3 of those excess deaths were from COVID-19. The other 1/3 were from other causes. And I would suspect that a good portion of the deaths in that younger cohort were deaths due to despair, due to other reasons. We've seen a spike in overdoses. And I would suspect that a good portion of those excess deaths in that younger cohort were from drug overdoses and other deaths that were triggered by some of the implications of what we've gone through to try to deal with COVID-19.
Wow, and just to point out, they say 1/3 don't have, 1/3 of a spiking, so there's excess deaths, and 1/3 of them aren't even being caused by COVID-19. Very questionable. Can't tell whether they're putting the youth in that group or if they're saying that they're in the COVID group. But I also think that I want to remind everybody these deaths are incredibly bloated. We've talked about it over and over again. Where last year we would have said you died from heart disease or complications from heart disease, even though you got a flu and that turned into pneumonia, ended up killing you. We've said over and over again, the heart disease, the COPD, the diabetes, we used to recognize that it had killed your immune system to the point where you're now dying from a flu or a common cold. But now we're saying that cold, that COVID is what killed you. So these are even bloated numbers. But even under those circumstances, we are seeing this gigantic rise, as both now Redfield and Gottlieb have shown out, deaths of despair, people overdosing, suicides, and just really, really depressing numbers. All right, continue on.
Right. And you notice what he said at the end there. These deaths may be because of the measures we had to take to deal with COVID-19, basically because of the lockdown. I mean,
Right.
That's really translated. And it seems to me, just being a media person, that obviously they don't want to associate lockdowns and life years lost and death. So now we have Revolver. It's a media outlet. They really took this idea by the reins, and they commissioned a study in the end of August 31st. And they put out an article about life years lost. So what they said is it's COVID-19 lockdowns over 10 times more deadly than the pandemic itself. Previous research on job displacement and mortality has found that displaced workers face a significant increase in mortality rates, from which lost years of life can be estimated. Job losses and permanent job separations have been shown to correlate directly with increases in heart disease, drug overdoses, lung cancer, liver disease, among other factors of increased mortality risk. They go on to say, beyond direct job displacements, additional research has shown that labor market recessions have significant but lagged effects on the future mortality rates of those entering the labor market. By these estimates, long-term life years lost due to the COVID-19 recession in the U.S. totaled around 18.7 million. Wrap your head around that for a second. It's 18.7 million. This is a gigantic number, and something that we're not seeing in the mainstream news.
And so what is that compared to? So they're saying the lockdown is going to cause 18.7 million life years lost. Do we know what the so here? So you're going to get into that, I guess, the estimate for the COVID itself. So
yeah, so
take us through this.
Absolutely. So this is a table from the Revolver article, and it's 2020 displaced workers. This was the estimated life years lost, but a little more, over 8 million. The new workforce entrants, still over 8 million, and the total recent graduates over 2. So that's 18.7 million life years lost directly due to the economy. So now when we look at the graph of this, so what the Revolver article did is they compared the U.S. to Sweden, because Sweden did not have a lockdown. And what they found at that time with those numbers is that during the lockdown, the U.S. lost basically 18.7 life years lost. Sweden lost 0. So the COVID deaths from life years lost from COVID deaths in the U.S.
Oh,
was
so they
2
ran life
points.
years lost from the actual COVID deaths. The age of those people totals out. What was that total? It looks like somewhere around 2 million.
Yeah, it was
2.7 million, I think, is what I'm reading there.
correct. Yeah, 2.7 million in the U.S. and then 2.6 million in Sweden. And they
But
basically
Sweden
said,
doesn't have 2.6 million deaths. They have a much smaller number.
right. So what they did was they said if Sweden was the same size as the U.S., this is the total life years lost compared to basically how many people died per 100,000.
Oh, so
So it
they
was
just said if Sweden was as big as America, this is what it would look like on a graph. But the point, so then bring it back. So now I understand it. So the two blue lines are essentially if USA and Sweden were the same, they used two different approaches to COVID-19. They both had would have very similar death rates, which we have seen. But the difference would be you have 2.7 million deaths in America, life years lost. Sweden, roughly the same. But in America, we're going to have 18.7 million life years lost from the lockdown, and Sweden is going to have none. And
Right.
so that is very, very alarming. I mean, you talk about moving a totally much more devastating number. It's a fascinating way to look at it, especially when we see all these arguments, right? Well, I mean, when we look at, we've all made Sweden as the discussion saying, well, look how well Sweden's done. I mean, sure, they're seeing an uptick in cases, probably asymptomatic cases too, but their death rate is still flatlined. And even though people say, well, more people died in Sweden than Denmark, they look around them, less people have died than in the USA, even per million when you sort of use that category. But this shows us a totally different thing, right? This shows us the long term, when we reflect back years from now at what was the total carnage of COVID-19, those of us that locked down are multiplying 10 times the amount of carnage then of what Sweden is going to experience. They are only going to have the deaths that took place from COVID-19. And by the way, the lockdown did not slow our deaths, didn't protect us from high numbers, so it was totally useless. All it's done is add on to potential future issues. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And then what they're talking about too is they were saying that the unemployment rate, because this is the study that they did, basically it works around the economy. So they said the unemployment rate was 14.7% in April. That's where it peaked. And we're looking at that. Now it's back down now to 6.9% as of this morning with the new numbers released. But when you talk of a second lockdown, as Michael Osterholm was discussing earlier, this should be talked about, because if that unemployment rate begins to spike again, if we see 14.7 again, I mean, theoretically, we could see a double of those numbers if the life years lost in the U.S. from a second lockdown. That's going to be a problem, and this really has to be openly debated and talked about before we just slap the idea of another lockdown like the UK did.
I want to make it clear to everybody watching, as I said, if you were on a newsletter, you're going to be able to read this Revolver article. The graph you just saw, we created based on the numbers. Those graphs are not in the paper. We took the numbers and then put them on a graph so that you can look at them. That was created by the Highwire. Don't want to confuse anybody. This was not created by the article writers. And so because of that, and Jeffrey, let me go ahead and let you sign off. Thank you so much for this incredible reporting, and we look forward to you coming back next week. Everyone can check out the Jackson Report at thehighwire.com. He writes and gets into deeper discussions about this. But because we are in this place, we've just created a graph to try and show you something. I don't want to overly manipulate it, and we were lucky enough to get a hold of Darren Beatty, who works at Revolver, has made it happen, is a large part of how this study took place. So before I take this too far out of what really was discussed or somehow look like I'm manipulating it, let's bring the man himself. I'm joined right now by Darren Beatty. Darren, you just sort of try to break down this article as quickly as we could. Is there anything to fix that maybe we misunderstood? Because I definitely want to make sure that we are clearly laying out what this study had to say.
Great. Well, depending on how much time we have, I'd be happy to walk through the entire basic logic of the study step by step. And I think your previous coverage was very good in drawing attention to the importance of life years as the relevant metric to decide, as a matter of public policy, whether lockdowns are better or worse than no lockdowns from the perspective of maximizing human life. Now, just the bird's eye position on this that I think is really important for everyone to take home. The study itself is, fairly sophisticated, really gets into the numbers, and your listeners might have to review it kind of carefully to get the full benefit from it. But I want to emphasize the main points. Firstly, early on when COVID came, there was a lot of talk about, oh, we need to lock everything down because the economy is not more important than one human life. If it will save one human life, we need to shut down the entire economy. And what this study does, I think in the most general terms, is it totally refutes that frame of thinking. That in fact, you cannot separate lives from livelihood. And to underscore this, so one metric to evaluate a policy like doing a lockdown or not is called the value of statistical life. And that's typically set at 10 million. So if you're a public policy analyst and you want to say, okay, is this policy X good or bad? Well, if you can save one life and the policy costs less than 10 million, then you go for it. If it costs more than 10 million, you don't go for it. And that's, the value of statistical life metric. Now, the question would be, why don't we just arbitrarily set the value of statistical life to 100 million? Well, what happens there is you might end up implementing regulatory policies that are so restrictive economically that they end up actually on net reducing life through the social economic status channel. So one concrete example of how this might work, let's say you're evaluating transportation policy. You say, we're putting the value of a life so high that we're going to justify any safety regulations imaginable in order to prevent deaths from air travel. And let's say you do that. Well, that's all well and good. But those increased regulations will make the price of air travel more expensive and will deter people from using air travel, and those people might use less safe means. And so on net, the result of the policy is actually negative in terms of overall protection of saving human
you
lives.
you would see in your graph that, oh yeah, less people are dying in airplanes, but you're not looking at those that are taking buses, trains, and cars that are now dying because they weren't utilizing the safety that already existed on the plane. All right, that's fascinating.
Now getting more concrete relative to this COVID policy. Now, a well-substantiated literature, mainstream economic literature that draws very specific correlations between a delta increase in unemployment and negative health effects on life expectancy. So the natural study, which should have been conducted by, it should have been conducted as a matter of policy before implementing unprecedented lockdowns. It wasn't done, or at least it wasn't done publicly. But the no-brainer policy analysis is, will the economic costs of imposing the lockdowns, given the literature on the connection between economic costs and life costs, will that end up doing more harm than good? And so what the study did at revolver.news is it drew upon two major studies, one on the health effects and life expectancy effects of unemployment, and the second one on entering into the labor force in a recession. And so each one of those had a coefficient for how many life years are lost per additional year of unemployment. We applied both of those, and that's how we got the 18.7 million life years lost cumulatively through these lockdowns.
Now, just to be
here's
clear,
maybe what-
you're not arbitrarily just choosing numbers. These are numbers that have been used in other studies. These are the numbers that we use to determine these types of things.
The coefficients come from well-established
Okay.
pre-existing studies. And in fact, just as an additional note, I think it's really interesting and suspicious that the life expectancy relevance of socioeconomic status employment was not invoked and implemented in this policy analysis, because it's historically a particularly important thing for the left, because these studies are actually usually invoked to support, say, public health programs and jobs programs, because the argument is, if we don't secure people with jobs, they're going to actually die earlier due to these established correlations between socioeconomic status and health. So this is a whole kind of a trope within public health analysis typically, and for some reason their attention to this correlation was uniquely suspended when it came to the cost-benefit analysis of COVID lockdowns, which I think is very interesting when it comes to kind of the sociology of expertise and maybe some of the incentives involved. But be that as it may, we concluded 18.7 million life years lost due to the lockdown policies. And here's where kind of maybe a bit of clarification is in order relative to Sweden, is that we don't only have to calculate the life years lost, we have to calculate the life years saved from the lockdowns. And in order to do that, what we did was we basically said, okay, how many life years were lost in the US versus how many life years would have been lost had we not done lockdowns. Now, we use Sweden as a lower bound case because Sweden had particularly kind of good numbers, and we used the UK as an upward bound case because the UK actually began with a kind of no lockdown strategy. And so just to make the estimate fair, we use Sweden as a low bound and the UK as the upper bound.
Okay.
And on that basis, concluded that anywhere between quarter million to 1 million life years may have been saved. And again, we were using the most conservative estimates imaginable. Actually, if you get realistic, the numbers are actually probably much more compelling against the lockdowns, because we took the numbers for granted in terms of what the life years would have been, were lost due to COVID, when in fact, as people who died of COVID generally had a bunch of comorbidities, so you couldn't assume that their life expectancy would be an ordinary life expectancy. So just to be
right, that's a great point. They were going to, as many have said, in Italy, they said, at first it was like 88%, now over 90% were going to die this year anyway from their comorbidities. You really cannot say. So we're giving them life years that they weren't going to have anyway. Just to be clear, we pulled. We pulled the UK for the audience, and this is why we give you articles. I don't want to get too in the weeds, and we weren't planning on being blessed with Darren here today, so I'm glad you're bringing the clarity to it. And I just didn't want to, there was getting to be a lot of charts, but that's very interesting. You sort of moved across it. Something I want to point out, because I think we're watching this right now, we're thinking, Darren, that you did this study, but the truth is that you had 3 high-level scientists, doctorates, that put this together, but you changed their names. They used pseudonyms in order to do this study. Can you explain why that was the decision to sort of hide their identities when they were doing this work?
Right. I mean, this gets to the kind of the sociology of expertise that I was mentioning earlier. Why was it that these so-called experts doing the public policy analysis, who are usually very attentive to the connection between socioeconomic status and life expectancy and public health generally, why did they uniquely suspend this connection when it came to evaluating COVID lockdowns? Well, there are something called incentives. These so-called experts are human beings with all too human incentives. And unfortunately, there are profoundly negative consequences within academia for people doing this type of sober, objective analysis that points to the conclusion that these lockdowns were far more devastating than COVID itself. And I think that the only fair interpretation is that the COVID lockdowns amount to the greatest crime against humanity outside of war and genocide, and arguably the greatest public policy blunder in our nation's history. And the idea that we got to this place and that basically the entire world economy was in many ways suspended to address a disease, the average age of death for whose victim is higher, at least in the United States, than the average life expectancy, which is really inconceivable as a matter of public policy.
I think someone was saying like 82 years old or something like that is the average age of death from COVID-19.
Right, between 79 and 82. Either way, it's higher than the average life expectancy, which is amazing. Even the Spanish flu, which is typically invoked as one of the greatest pandemics in American history and even world history, the average age of death was something like 28. And we didn't shut down the entire economy to address that. So this is really unprecedented. It is, as I said, I think it's the greatest public policy blunder in this nation's history. And I think what people need to take home, because the study can sound, the study itself is actually not so complicated, but it can sound that way. But the most important take-home point here is that it's not this trade-off between economy and lives. There are very demonstrable connections between economic conditions and public health conditions. Economists know all too well that this connection exists, and they uniquely ignored this connection in order to support this policy blunder of lockdowns. So I think that's just the major take-home point. Another thing I'd like to say is, I think Revolver.news and this study had actually had a profound effect on the President of the United States. The President read this study, he tweeted it, he actually tweeted a congressman who tweeted it, and ever since he read that study, it's become a common feature of his rhetoric on this issue, drawing attention correctly to the fact that the costs of the lockdowns are far more than the costs of the disease itself. So at least there's that kind of benefit to our public discourse for this. But the fact that no official university has done this exact study, which they easily could have done, just further condemns the state of expertise and public policy analysis in this country.
Darren, congratulations. First of all, I know, we've never met before. This is the first time we've ever had the chance to speak, but to be involved in media, to have something like Revolver, to back this work and get it out there, and to see it, get to a place where you have some policy people finally looking at it. I've been screaming about this since the pandemic started. I was saying we have got to start looking at this death rate. What death rate warrants destroying your economy and all of the disaster that comes from that? Certainly it can't be a 0.26% death rate, because almost every virus we look at is on track for 0.26%. If we lower the bar to there, we are going to be masked and locked down the rest of our lives, which may come with the next, president, however that irons out. Darren, I hope we can look forward to having you on the show again in the future. Thank you for bringing such clarity to this discussion, and thank you for the work you do. One more time, if people want to read your article, see what's going on, where do we go?
Yeah, please go to revolver.news, and we're tracking the lockdowns very carefully. There's a bunch of other political stuff going on, but we are very, very attentive to the lockdowns, their effects, what we can expect. And I'm very proud that the site broke this analysis that's had an effect And I think anyone who marshals real evidence and real arguments to expose the real crime of these lockdowns. It's a crime both in the sense of being just malicious and damaging, but also it's just criminally stupid. It's criminal as a public policy blunder, and I think there's never been such a big blunder in our nation's history. So hopefully we don't repeat it at the very least.
I completely agree with you, Darren. Have a great day. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
Thank you.
Wow, I mean, amazing. And I'm so proud that the High Wire is beginning to bring in the type of guests that we've been having, the incredible scientists from around the world that you are seeing appear here. You have no idea how many are calling us and reporting to us and giving us information and feeding us the stories that we're now bringing you on this show, though they don't want to be seen. Just like in Revolver, they gave pseudonyms to the 3 scientists that are world-renowned scientists that did the work just as they would for any government, only they were afraid of attacks upon them, their credibility, their work, so they did it anonymously. That's how a lot of what's happening on the High Wire, and that's how, in many ways, I'm about to bring you a news story, a big story, the biggest breaking story in the country. We are about to bring you what we now know to be the truth behind the science, not what you're hearing when you're watching this in the news.
A major breakthrough from Pfizer, reporting its vaccine for coronavirus in human trials appears to be more than 90% effective.
90% effective.
90% effective.
90% effective.
90% effective.
90% effective. 90% efficacy.
A 90% efficacy.
That's better than I was expecting.
It's what the world has been waiting for.
Pfizer executives are calling it one of the biggest medical breakthroughs in the past 100 years. A COVID vaccine developed in just 6 months.
You know, it's extraordinary, Wolf. It is really a big deal.
With Pfizer now on track to seek emergency FDA approval as early as this month, the 2-dose vaccine, given 3 weeks apart, is being called one of the biggest medical breakthroughs in a century.
Pfizer says it already has a stockpile of this medicine ready to go.
I think we can see light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, that's how the news organizations you watch every single day of the week reported on Pfizer's gigantic statement. They now have a COVID-19 vaccine that is 90% effective. Before I really get into this and get into what real news should actually look like, let's look at some of the headlines that have been created and what we're about to start seeing because of how mainstream media covers this. Of course, right after it, we now see Ticketmaster. How Ticketmaster plans to check your vaccine status for concerts exclusive. Now, I'm not going to get into that article or all the articles that are now arguing about will we get on planes. Here's one about planes, right? Daily Mail, no jab, no plane. Anti-vaxxers who refuse to get a coronavirus jab could be banned from traveling overseas, as well as restaurants and public transport. Boy, are they getting excited. We can't wait to really crack down on those anti-vaxxers that are just crazies when we know we've got a 90% effective vaccine now. Do you? For all of you that are joining us for the first time on the High Wire, get ready to listen to what truth sounds like. Not my opinion. We're going to actually read through the science. But before I do, let's make sure that you do realize that the day that Pfizer says we have a giant discovery in this amazing race that has 100 other drug companies trying to get to a vaccine that will be distributed to 7.5 billion people, could one day make as much as $750 billion or more if it's a cheap $100 a pop vaccine. Before we get there, let's just point out that the CEO of Pfizer, the day of, cashed out 60% of his stock and went on to make, 4 million, I think, somewhere around $4 million from that announcement. So 5 million. Good on you for making 5 million for an announcement. What is that announcement actually valued at? What does it actually mean? Does it mean they have a vaccine that is 90% effective? Let's get into what the news doesn't really tell you about. Here's what the headline said in CBS News. Pfizer says trial shows COVID vaccine is more than 90% effective. It goes on to say the pharmaceutical giant said it would be applying for emergency use authorization from the FDA as soon as final data meets safety milestones, which it expects to happen in the third week of November. Pfizer did, however, strike a large-scale production and delivery deal with the U.S. government worth up to $1.95 billion to secure an initial 100 million doses of its vaccine following its approval and the option to purchase 500 million more, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. Now, that's how CBS left it, right? Oh, wow, great, 90% effective. Sure, let's just buy hundreds of millions of dollars worth of this for hundreds of millions of people in doses, and so the band plays on. But perhaps if we had real reporters and real journalists, the discussion would actually look at what Pfizer is saying and what they are not saying. Sure, the overview is 90% effective, but let's go ahead and look at the fine print, shall we? Here's what the study actually shows from Pfizer. Pfizer and BioNTech announced vaccine candidate against COVID-19 achieved success in first interim analysis from phase 3 study. Vaccine, now listen, you got to pay attention here. And for those of you that are joining us for the first time, this isn't fluff. I expect you to be intelligent. I'm expecting that our audience right now has at least a high school, understanding of science, because we are not a headline news machine. I'm doing real interviews like you just saw. We're going to really get into the details, so get ready for this. And if this bores you, go ahead, lock yourself down, put a mask on your face, and shiver in your basement until you die. I don't care. Let's move on. Vaccine candidate, this is their own writing. Vaccine candidate was found to be more than 90% effective in preventing COVID-19 in participants without evidence of prior SARS-CoV-2 infection in the first interim efficacy analysis. Analysis evaluated 94 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in trial participants. Let me read that again. The analysis evaluated 94 people. 94 confirmed cases of COVID-19 in trial participants. The study enrolled 43,538 participants, with 42% having diverse backgrounds, and no serious safety concerns have been observed yet in our, what I think is around 2 months of this trial so far. So in 2 months, we haven't seen any really serious safety concerns like AstraZeneca, which shut down and people were getting paralyzed and things like that. Safety and additional efficacy data continue to be collected. All right, this is very important. The study also will evaluate, it hasn't yet, remember, look at this. The study also will evaluate the potential for the vaccine candidate to provide protection against COVID-19 in those who have had prior exposure to SARS-CoV-2, as well as vaccine prevention against severe COVID-19 disease. Let me read that one more time, because I'm pretty sure by those headlines you thought this is what was established, that we have a 90% efficacy at stopping transmission and spread of the disease and catching the disease. But no, they haven't done that yet. They plan. The study also one day will evaluate the potential for the vaccine candidate to provide protection against COVID-19 in those who have had prior exposure to SARS-CoV-2, as well as vaccine prevention against severe COVID-19 disease. We've been reporting on this over and over and over again. We did a huge story about this last week, that the endpoints of these trials are not designed to see if they stop the actual infection. I'm not going to get into the weeds between the difference between SARS-CoV-2 and actual COVID-19, but they look at them differently. All the asymptomatic carriers have SARS-CoV-2. You only have COVID-19 if you're sick and have symptoms, but let's not get buried in this. I want to get to the most important part of this. I mean, come on, folks. We're expecting good science to be done here, right? We're trusting these people literally with our lives. And so when we look at 94 total cases out of 43,000, can we throw up this graph? This is what actually took place. Out of the 43,900 or so actual participants, or 500 participants, 94 of them, that's how big it is. Literally 94 people, that tiny little red line, their entire trial is only right now looking at that tiny little red line of 94 people and telling every news agency, which is screaming from the mountaintops, yay, we have done it, we have achieved it. We are there, Valhalla, or whatever you want to call it, Nirvana, Utopia. We are saved. Bring that back up again, please. I want to tell you, when we were trying to make this graph, we were using several different computer programs. It wouldn't allow us to sliver that small. It said, no, that's a 0. So you're saying 100% of the circle. We were fighting the program to say, no, it's just 94. We just want to see how big that line would be. Why? Because 94 out of the 43,500 or so participants is actually this. 94 equals 0.2% of the trial participants right now is all we're looking at. We only have 0.2% of them that have gotten infected so that we can get any data whatsoever. Okay, now what are they looking at? What they're comparing and they're basically saying is out of these 94 people, forget about the 43,500 that were in the trial, out of the 94, 10% of them got the vaccine and 90% of them got the placebo or the control group, right? So what they're saying is out of that, we now determine, now these 94, since our vaccinated group did 90% better or had a 90% success rate, that we're now determining not only for the other 43,400, something that we haven't seen yet, we're going to determine that for you, the 7.5 billion people in the world. Now, I want to try and help you wrap your head around this because it's difficult to have numbers and really try to understand math. We've all been watching counting being discussed all over the country, right? Counting data. When do you decide? When do you call a president? When do you call a governor or a senator? How do you know when you've had enough numbers in to say, concrete, we understand this? So why don't we do this for this number with our little 90% effective COVID-19 vaccine? If we were voting, and if the vote had decided that this is what you're going to be injected with, then this is what this would look like when it came to the data on a vote for the COVID-19 vaccine. Let's bring this up, because this is how we're all looking at it, right? You have the vaccine group had 9 people that got sick. And so they're saying we know that the vaccine essentially didn't protect 9 out of the roughly 94 people. Now, I want to be clear, we made up that number 9. They are not giving us that much detail. They're saying 10%, so we're assuming somewhere around 9. Whereas the control, the other group got 85. Now, we're going, yay, it looks like our candidate is 90% effective and the control group is 10% effective. But look above. This is what we've been doing watching the counting. You don't even have 1% of the precincts reporting. You have 0.2% reporting. From 0.2%, they have just called the winner. Pfizer has won the vaccine race with a 90% efficacy rate. You and I both know, we've been watching these numbers change. You cannot have 0.2% of the reporting being done and then predict that the end result is going to be you will have 90% will still be successful using the vaccine compared to those that don't. This is insane. This is insane because you've got to pay attention to what they're talking about. They're talking about getting an emergency use authorization now from this sliver of the actual test group. They don't know anything right now. That sliver is going to decide the fate of the world. And what do I mean by that? Once they get that emergency use authorization, what we're seeing across the board is that there are discussions, once you have an emergency use proclamation or availability to the vaccine, watch for it, it becomes an ethical question. Can we continue to have a placebo group that have not received the vaccine? Can we let them go along now that we actually have a candidate that's 90% effective? This is how this brain science is going to work. This is how they're going to manipulate it. This is how CNN is going to report it to you. This is what Sanjay Gupta is about to tell you. Because we have a vaccine that reached emergency use because of its 90% of efficacy, we've decided it would be unethical to have a placebo group receiving saline injections now that we have a product that can protect them. And then they go and inject your entire placebo group, thereby ending any future discussions about the safety of this vaccine. Now, when you watch all these headlines screaming 90% effective, I want to be perfectly clear. We don't even know where these people live. We don't know anything. When you talk about science being done correctly, you've got to look at all the confounding issues. Where do they live? Are they in a highly infectious rate? Were the people that got the placebo in a higher infection rate like Brazil or Africa? Or were they somewhere else like Sweden? And just to be clear, when we list out this group, when they say our test group, it's not just in America. It's not just in England. Here is the list. It goes on and on. You know, you got United States, again, Germany, Brazil, Argentina, South Africa. This thing is all over the world. I think it's 154 different countries. Okay, we have sites in 154 different countries, eating different food, in different weather patterns. We don't know if these people went and got a flu shot or didn't get a flu shot. We have no idea. Freudian slip there, right? Sorry about that. We have no idea how these people are living. They literally, as far as we can tell, have grabbed the first 94 people from satellites all together in 154 different countries, and we're determining, don't care where they come from, what their lifestyle is, we're going to compare them to each other and say we have a 90% efficacy rate on this. People, you cannot make this stuff up, and you've really got to wake up about what is taking place here. And so I want to point out that we're now watching in England that they are rushing into delivering this vaccine. In America, we have a president about to do it. Here's what's happening in England. GP services could be cut back for months as armies help surgeries roll out surgeries roll out 1.2 million COVID vaccine doses a week starting on December 1st. Literally just a couple of weeks from now, they are about to start rolling out what looks like this vaccine. Has got no long-term safety understanding. We have no idea what the lifestyles of the people, this tiny 0.2% sliver of a trial, absolutely unreal. Last week, we brought you a head scientist that had worked for Pfizer most of his life, Dr. Yeadon. Let me remind you, just so you have a sense of this guy, this is what he had to say last week that we played on the show. Take a look at this.
Hello, I'm Dr. Mike Yeadon. I have a PhD in biological sciences and 32 years experience in the pharmaceutical industry and in biotech. I believe that the pandemic in UK concluded at the end of the summer. I think that because about 30% of us had prior immunity to the virus and slightly over 30% more have become immune, having been infected and recovered. If that's true, then there are too few remaining susceptible people to support the kind of outbreak that we're told is now going on. So there's a problem. I think the PCR test at present is throwing up so many false positives that in fact we're misdiagnosing the cause of the deaths that are being reported. The number of deaths occurring at the moment is normal for the time of year.
Okay, the reason why, obviously I was talking about our discussion last week, which was PCR tests. If you want to know how bad PCR tests and see signs like you're seeing right now, go back and watch last week's episode. But I bring him up, then he was saying exactly what we just showed you Alison Pollock was saying on the news earlier when they're locking down up there in the UK, that, because of those lockdowns, they don't work. We can't be testing them because the tests don't work. But let's get back to our point right now. We now have Matt Hancock saying, I'm going to start delivering this to millions of people across the UK. This is the Secretary, essentially, of Health in the UK. Well, Dr. Yeadon has gone on, shall we say, a truth mission on Twitter. I'm going to read every tweet he's put out because this is really important. This is his rebuke of this plan to roll out this vaccine. Remember, this guy spent his life at Pfizer. Who's made this vaccine? Take a look at this. Response to the vaccine consultation. Dear Mr. Hancock, I have a degree in biochemistry and toxicology and a research-based PhD in pharmacology. I've spent 32 years working in pharmaceutical R&D, mostly in new medicines, for disorders of lung and skin. I was a VP, Vice President at Pfizer, and CEO of a biotech I founded, Xiarco, acquired by Novartis. I'm knowledgeable about new medicine R&D, trust me. I have read the consultation document. I've rarely been as shocked and upset. All vaccines against the SARS-CoV-2 virus are by definition novel. No candidate vaccine has been in development for more than a few months. If any such vaccine is approved for use under any circumstances that are not explicitly experimental, I believe that recipients are being misled to a criminal extent. This is because there are precisely 0 human volunteers for whom there could possibly be more than a few months past dose safety information. My concern does not arise because I have negative views about vaccines. I don't. Instead, it's the very principle that politicians seem ready to waive that new medical interventions at this incomplete state of development should not be made available to subjects on anything other than an explicitly experimental basis. That's my concern. And the reason for that concern is that it is not known what the safety profile will be 6 months or a year or longer after dosing. You have literally no data on this, and neither does anyone else. And it isn't that I'm saying that unacceptable adverse effects will emerge after longer intervals after dosing. No. It is that you have no idea what will happen yet. Despite this, you'll be creating the impression that you do. Several of the vaccine candidates utilize novel technology, which have not previously been used to create vaccines. There is therefore no long-term safety data which can be pointed to in support of the notion that it's reasonable to expedite development and to waive absent safety information on this occasion. I am suspicious of the motives of those proposing expedited use in the wider human population. We now understand who is at particular elevated risk of morbidity and mortality from acquiring this virus. Volunteers from these groups only should be provided detailed information about risk and benefit, including the sole point I make here. Only if informed consent is given should any experimental vaccine be used. He obviously is calling it experimental. I don't trust you. You've not been straightforward and have behaved appallingly throughout this crisis. You're still doing it now, misleading about infection risk from young children. Why should I believe you in relation to experimental vaccines? Dr. Michael Yeadon. That is what a real scientist and every real scientist should be shouting right now. Okay, you have promising results in 0.2% of your test group. I'm sorry, science does not base decisions on 0.2% of what is an already very small test group at 43,000 people. Remember, there are millions of us, each one of our bodies being completely different than the next in so many different ways. There is no one-size-fits-all, and obviously you can't do a study that encompasses all of the issues that exist in humanity and our differences and diversities, but certainly you should wait till we find out what happens to the 43,000 you did choose. Okay? Let's wait a minute. And the truth is there was never a plan to wait for it. Actually, they plan on coming to final determinations based on only, I think it's 164 or so of people getting infected. They're going to make their final determinations from that. So you go ahead. If you want to line up for this vaccine, you go right ahead. If you feel like you can call an election based on 0.2% of the ballots coming in, then go right ahead and see what your world continues to look at. Let's see how healthy you remain when you let science do its work that way. Which brings me to, it's not just Dr. Yeadon, right? It's not just the high wire. It's not, just Pollack and other scientists around the world saying, come on, we know how to do science. How about those doctors that right now are getting calls from the health department in the UK that's saying, hey, by the way, we need you now to start delivering in order to reach our number. Can we bring back that Matt Hancock headline? Because I think it said how many they plan on reaching. Here it is. GP service could be cut back for months, so they're going to stop GPs from doing everything else as Army helps roll out 1.2 million COVID vaccine doses a week starting December 1st. This means that virtually every doctor in the UK has to start giving this vaccine every 5 minutes in order to reach this number. And because of this, there was a dialogue in a blog that took place between many doctors. Many were watching. Here's just a snippet. We happened to stumble upon this because we've got great researchers all over the world. Listen to doctors trying to contemplate, how am I going to do this, and what is the ethics of it, and what am I responsible for when I don't know jack about this vaccine? Take a look at this.
I've seen in a number of places this phrase, GPs have a moral duty to play their part in delivering the COVID-19 vaccine. And I think that's undeniable. But GPs have a moral duty to fulfill the rest of their contract correctly. They have a moral duty to do things safely, but the system has a moral duty to use that resource effectively. And not to blackmail them with moralistic language into agreeing to something which they perhaps feel now understand isn't deliverable. So I think this is a bit of an issue for me, really.
One thing that is being slightly forgotten about is the consent process for this vaccination. So this is a new vaccine, let's be absolutely clear, in terms of how this works. It is a new vaccine, and the information we have on the implications of the vaccine not 100% clear. So we can't tell you, what impact this vaccine will have on you in 5 years' time. No one could state that. So part of the requirement is that a GP will have to do the consent process for patients with this. And that consent process is going to take time. Let's be absolutely clear. This isn't like a flu vaccination, standard seasonal flu vaccination consent that we do, because we know the implications. Most patients have had it before, they're already having it. And we have got good information in terms and confidence in terms of how the flu vaccination works for many patients. I am quite mindful of the fact, if I am a GP being asked to consent somebody from this, the only way I will be able to do this is I have absolute certainty that if a patient unfortunately has an untoward event because of the vaccine, that doesn't come back to me, because I'm being asked to consent them for something that I don't have the information outside of what we know. So there are massive unknowns with this, and I am aware that I think this will be covered under the CNSGP scheme, so the NHS resolutions and stuff. But then again, we've been told things like this in the past, and individual GPs have then suffered as a result of it. So there is a question mark on terms of how that's going to work and things. So, there needs to be clarity from the centre as to the consent process in terms of the indemnity for those clinicians that are willing to help and do this, to make sure that it's safe for them. And that's a real challenge.
Amazing. And again, if you want to see that entire dialogue, I geek out on stuff like this. Maybe you're not getting it. These doctors are being put on the front line to deliver something they know nothing about. And they're asking, am I completely indemnified? I mean, what goes down if they get injured? I am going to be accepting responsibility. I am going to be consenting to a vaccine, telling them they need to get it when I don't know how it works. I don't know how much damage it's going to do. And what if it does injure them? And you hear the doctor saying to himself, and I've watched this several times, but it just hit me, saying there have been historical moments where we were told we were protected from indemnity, but that didn't end up being the case, and certain doctors went down. I was thinking, I wonder if he's referring to the Nuremberg trials, when you had 16 doctors saying, hey man, Hitler said it was okay, right? I was doing what every other doctor was doing. We were told we were doing what was right. We were advancing medicine, right? And now you're going to hang me because I killed innocent people? That wasn't my fault. I knew nothing about the product. Matt Hancock made me deliver it. Why is he not hanging right now? Do you see where this is going? This is no joke. This is not a joke. This is serious. They are about to deliver an experimental vaccine with zero safety understanding based on 0.2% of the people that are in a trial. And now you have doctors. Are they even going to do it? Are they going to revolt? Are they going to say, no way, man, I'm not touching that vaccine? I wonder. Are our American doctors going to do it? It seemed like our American doctors had no problem just using ventilator after ventilator and watching a death rate they'd never seen before of 9 out of 10 people dying in hospitals, saying, well, hey, that's the protocol in America. Protocol is this vaccine that nobody knows anything about, but hey, I washed my hands of that. Good luck. Here we go. Now remember, on top of all the issues we've discussed, I'm going to really freak out my group, my team right here. Do you know how you have to deliver this? This incredible vaccine has only been tested, we only know about 0.2%, has to stay at over 90 below zero, a critical hurdle for Pfizer's coronavirus vaccine. We have to keep it at 94 degrees below zero everywhere it goes. So not only are these doctors saying, I didn't know what this vaccine does, and I certainly know that my clinic doesn't have a refrigerator that goes to 94 below zero, and in 2 weeks I'm supposed to be injecting one person every 5 freaking minutes. Nobody on CNN told you that, did they? Nobody on MSNBC told you any of this, did they? No one on Fox told you any of this, did they? No, nobody is telling you the truth. And I am telling you, people very well may die. I'm not even going to get into the depths of what we discussed about issues of immune enhancement and how dangerous this vaccine actually is. But in the center of all of this, with everybody screaming and jumping up and down how great this new vaccine is, there's one person that tweeted out that inspired me so much to bring back an episode we don't do very often, and it's time for Vaxhole of the Week. Who is our Vaxhole of the Week? Let me go ahead and give you the definition for those because it's been a really long time. Yes, we got it in the Urban Dictionary. I think they've taken it down since then. But it's a person who quotes vaccine safety science that does not exist. Okay, so who is the Vaxhole of the Week? Drum roll, please.
Not listening.
Even further.
Why is Piers Morgan the Vaxhole of the Week? Look at this tweet. He got so excited about this COVID vaccine from Pfizer. To all the anti-vaxxer COVIDiots, predictably now screaming that they won't have the jab, let me say this. If it's approved, then I will have it done live on TV. If you refuse to have it, then no more flying for Yoo-hoo and no using the NHS if you get COVID. Deal? All right, Piers. I know obviously you're really excited about this. It doesn't matter. You don't know that Dr. Yeadon is out there saying Piers is about to take a completely experimental vaccine. He has no idea what he's doing. He has no brain. And you, Matt Hancock, are making him think that this is a safe vaccine, and now he's putting out stupid tweets. That's what's really going on here, Piers. You have doctors. That doctor that's about to inject you on your show is quivering and shivering because he knows he has a serious ethical problem. He doesn't know what this thing's going to do to you over the next 3 or 4 years. And guess what? Neither do the manufacturers. In fact, we brought up, several weeks ago, AstraZeneca was celebrating the fact that governments were going to protect them from liability. Why? Why were they celebrating? Because they said, I quote, this is a unique situation where we as a company simply cannot take the risk if, in 4 years, the vaccine is showing side effects. Ruud Dabur, a member of Astra's senior executive team, told Reuters. You see, Piers, you want to inject something into your body that 0.2% of people in a study of only 43,000 seem to have some effect. We have watched monkeys and animals die in trials all for the last 20 years trying to make this vaccine. Suddenly you think they have an answer. You're not listening to the scientists all over there saying, whoa, 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 slow down. So Piers, you're rushing in. You're rushing in. And you're saying that I'm the COVIDiot? I am not the COVIDiot that just turned himself into a lab animal. So please, if you want to be a macaque monkey, you go right ahead. But we, the free citizens of the world, with brains that know how to look at the science and don't just sell our lives short based on 0.2% of people in a tiny study done by the very people that are going to make billions of dollars on this and cashed in the day you got all excited. But for the final coup de grace, Piers, of what someone like me, go ahead and call me an anti-vaxxer, what I do before I decide to let people inject things into me is I actually do some research of my own. And you might be shocked to find that your own government in the UK knows they are about to start destroying lives with this vaccine that you cannot get your hands on soon enough. Get ready for this, folks. Check out what our research team found. This is Tenders Electronic Daily. This is basically when they want to submit for anyone in the EU that can help us with an issue, basically like a job board or a citing for, we're looking for a technology. The UK is now searching for a technology. Go back. Let me just read the headline. What is that technology? Just so you know, this is legitimate. The United Kingdom, London, where software package and information systems, we have a contract award. This was just placed a notice, results of the procurement procedure and supplies. Now let's look at what are they looking for. Description of the procurement. If anyone out there can help us, the MHRA, that's the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency. This would be like our HHS saying to the world, we need help, here's what we need. The MHRA urgently seeks an artificial intelligence, AI software tool to process the expected high volume of COVID-19 vaccine adverse drug reaction, ADRs, and ensure that no details from the ADR's reaction text are missed. It goes on. Type of a procedure, award of a contract without prior publication of a call for competition in the official journal of the European Union in the cases listed below. Explanation. Listen to this, folks. Let this sink in. I didn't write this. Call me an anti-vaxxer, but please, please read. For reasons of extreme urgency, under Regulation 32(2)(c) related to the release of a COVID-19 vaccine, MHRA have accelerated the sourcing and implementation of a vaccine-specific AI tool. Strictly necessary, it is not possible to retrofit the MHRA's legacy systems to handle the volume of ADRs, adverse events, remember, that will be generated by a COVID-19 vaccine. They're not even questioning it. Look at that. The legacy system cannot handle the sheer volume of ADRs that we are expecting will be generated by a COVID-19 vaccine. Therefore, if the MHRA does not implement the AI tool, it will be with the unable to process these ADRs effectively. This will hinder its ability to rapidly identify any potential safety issues with the COVID-19 vaccine and represents a direct threat to patient life and public health. Reasons of extreme urgency. The MHRA recognizes that its planned procurement process for the inability to effectively monitor adverse reactions to a COVID-19 vaccine. Events unforeseeable. The COVID-19 crisis is novel, and development in the research of COVID-19 vaccines have not followed any predictable pattern so far. Boom! You just saw it here on the high wire and nowhere else. The UK that started this whole pandemic with the imperial model that was total bullcrap, that is now locking down their nation and getting them ready for a forced vaccine program that the army is about to deliver, is now scrambling to try and find the software to track all of the people they're about to injure, including you, peers, you. This is what we do on the high wire. They may try to call this misinformation. Go ahead and read my Wikipedia page if you know what it's like or want to feel what it's like to be me delivering factual information that you will get if you join our newsletter. You can read this all yourself and you can bring it to the Thanksgiving table and say, hey folks, here's something that nobody else has shown you. You can also share this show with your friends and say, if you want the truth, there's only one place that I am finding it. And what has made all of this possible so that we could do this? Number one, a brilliant, genius, international team. No, we are not looking here in America, in Texas, where we have our studios, through the UK's databases. We have specialists in the UK that work for us, specialists around the world that are bringing this type of information. That has only been made possible not by Pfizer that funds us, not by Exxon that funds us, not by Pampers. You. You have made this possible so that we could continue to deliver shows like today, which has made us think We have more work to do. There's more we want to build to. You have no idea how the sausage is actually made back here, but trust me, we can make an even better sausage to put out there. And we're going to need your help. And in order to do that, we're launching a great new opportunity that will allow you to help us build the foundation that I hope will be a beacon for how news, real news, will be done in our future evolved world. Take a look at the high road. Four years ago, I embarked on a brand new journey, the Informed Consent Action Network. We have already won lawsuits against the National Institute of Health, Health and Human Services, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the FDA, along with thousands of FOIA requests that have provided in-depth insight into what's really going on at our government health agencies. The other part of the Informed Consent Action Network was media, and thus was born the idea of the high wire. It started in a little closet in a studio in Los Angeles, California. Quickly, we went from hundreds of views to thousands of views to tens of thousands of views. Can you imagine a news organization that doesn't have to answer to sponsors? That dream was made possible because we found a new sponsor, a new model, a new way forward. And that sponsor was you. Because of the generosity of many of our donors, we have been able to acquire a property of our own. And every Thursday I have to walk from those offices over to where our studio is being put together. That road to the high wire should be paved with the foundational principles of what we represent. And now today I'm excited to present the most ambitious project we have had to date. To put your love, your heart, your passion, your faith into a place that will be here on this campus forever. We're offering you the opportunity to purchase one brick over the holidays that will be a part of this road, the high road.
For the first time ever, not only are you supporting our vital programs like the High Wire and our legal efforts, but you're also going to become a permanent part of the foundation of our campus here at the Informed Consent Action Network. You can purchase a brick that you can personalize with a name, an inscription, or maybe even a vaccine-injured loved one in your family. To become part of this exciting project, go to ICanDecide.org and click on Buy a Brick.
When I think about the steps we've taken and those that lie ahead on this road, when I think about the high wire, which we originally named to say high above the circus of mainstream media, now I think of this road I walk every day to produce that show, the high road. I look forward to seeing your name here. I look forward to this opportunity where we can build it brick by brick, building the future for our children and the world. If you go to buy a brick, it's being handled by a company that does this. There'll be a map of where you can find your brick should you ever decide to come out and visit us and maybe get to be in the studio audience that we're working on actually building maybe, sometime in the near future. So join us in this incredible journey and leave a statement that will be here forever at our new studios. A few donors really made it possible, both through loans and things, so that we could have our own space that no one can take away from us. So we're really excited about that. But nothing excites me more than the announcement of our executive producer, Jennifer Sherry Perry, gave birth this morning to this beautiful baby, Saoirse Victoria Sherry Perry. And just so you get a sense, leave that up, of how committed we are. Adam, Jennifer's husband, is Irish, and Saoirse means freedom. Freedom, victory. Sherry Perry has just been brought into the world. And that's what we're doing this for. So proud of you guys. Jen, my heart goes out to you and your beautiful family. My heart goes out to all of you people out there with your children as we are fighting to get the truth, as we are fighting to maintain and take the future in our hands. This is a very, very important time. Our kids are at risk. We are now, every adult, at risk of dangerous steps by our governments, by the pharmaceutical industry, by big tech. The high wire is not going to stop this fight. We're going to stand on the front lines with you. Why are we here every day? Why do we believe in freedom and the victory? Because it will be ours. Because we will stand together. Because it is our destiny to make history and hold on to the truth so that it will be shared by the millions that come after us. Thank you for joining us. I'll see you next week. Thanks for watching, and thanks to the Highwire Insiders who make this show possible. If you'd like to become a Highwire Insider, then go to our website, thehighwire.com, and sign up now. And please, share the show. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, BitChute, and now on Roku. Because knowledge is power, censorship is real, and we need all the help we can get.